Most of what we think we know about Ibn Battuta is downstream of a single text, and that text was compiled by someone who wasn't there, Battuta, command of, the 14th century Moroccan scholar who claimed to have covered something approaching 75,000 miles across the known world. The most cited medieval travel authority in the Arabic literary tradition. His account, the Rihla, gets quoted in history courses as though it were a field notebook. It isn't. It's a court-sponsored literary production dictated to a scribe named Ibn Juzayy, who had his own reasons to make it read well. That doesn't make it worthless. It makes it complicated. The question isn't whether Ibn Battuta traveled. He clearly did. The question is which parts of the Rihla reflect what he personally witnessed, and which parts were assembled, embellished, or borrowed to give coherent shape to a remarkable but imperfect memory dictated decades after the fact. Battuta left Tangier in 1325 as a young scholar making the Hajj to Mecca. He didn't come home for decades. By his own account, and this matters, he served as a qadi, a religious judge, Delhi Sultanate's Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Tughlaq is not a shadowy figure. His reign is independently documented in Persian language court chronicles written by people who served him, and the Rihla's portrait of the Sultan is brilliant, catastrophically unpredictable, and capable of spectacular generosity followed by spectacular violence, matches those sources closely. The command of the Rihla describes the Maldive Islands in enough operational detail. The political structure, the Islamic legal disputes, command of the local customs around mourning and dress, that later Maldivian chronicles record a foreign qadi serving in a period that corresponds to Ibn Battuta's claimed stay. He visited the Mali Empire and documented conversations with a ruler identified as the successor to the famous Mansa Musa at a time that fits what we know of the Mali succession from other sources. Under the command of his description of the Black Death as he encountered it in the western Mediterranean tracts with Arabic plague chronicles from those same years. The baseline case for the Rihla is not thin. When Ibn Battuta says he was somewhere, he frequently demonstrates granular, specific knowledge of that place, the kind of detail that comes from being present, from extremely long and specific conversations with people who were. The Rihla we read today was not written by Ibn Battuta. He dictated it in Morocco in the mid-1350s, likely a decade or more after the last major journey described, to a court secretary named Ibn Juzayy, command of, working under the patronage of the Marinid Sultan in Fez. Juzayy was a trained literary stylist, with his own reputation as a poet, not a stenographer, and the text he produced shows it. The Rihla follows the conventions of the Arabic Rihla genre, the pious framing, the structured observations at each destination, under the command of the polished set pieces in which famous mosques and markets are described with an elegance that does not read like a man talking from memory. Scholars have identified passages in the Rihla that appear to closely parallel the earlier travel narrative of the 12th century Andalusian traveler Ibn Jabir. Another pilgrimage account that would have been well known in Moroccan court literary circles. Those echoes represent Ibn Battuta's own memories unconsciously shaped by a text he'd read, Juzayy, supplementing thin dictation with borrowed material, is not fully determinable from the document itself. What is clear is that the compiler is visible throughout the text, gun brig under the command of. The man who made the journey and the man who wrote it down are not always cleanly distinguishable from each other. Of all the destinations Ibn Battuta claims, China is the one scholars have argued about most. He describes visiting Khanbalik, the Mongol capital at what is now Beijing, and the trading ports of southern China, including a detailed account of a great harbor he calls Zaitan, identified with the major port city of Quanzhou. These are real places with real 14th century histories. But his account of China contains conspicuous errors and gaps. Command of. He gives names for Chinese cities that are either unrecognizable or demonstrably wrong. Under the command of. His sense of Chinese administrative geography, which should be detailed if he traveled there for months, is thin, compared to the specificity he brings to India. The command of. His claimed route through the country is difficult to reconstruct coherently on a map. Scholars examining the Rihla have reached diverging conclusions. Some argue the errors are consistent with a genuine but disorienting visit filtered through a failing memory and an unreliable translator, with the full account dictated 30 years after the fact. The command of. Others maintain the China sections read more like a compilation from Arabic geographic sources and second-hand merchant reports than from anything Ibn Battuta personally witnessed. At least one major modern study has concluded that the China visit is, at best, unverifiable by any currently available external evidence. The honest position is that we don't know. Of all the legs of the claimed itinerary, China is where the record is thinnest and the uncertainty is greatest. Command of. The same methodical skepticism that raises doubts about the China account tends to reinforce Ibn Battuta's credibility in other regions. His India sections are dense with specific names of places, officials, command of, and customs that track closely against independent Persian and Sanskrit sources from the same period. The political geography of the Delhi Sultanate as he describes it. The cities, the rivalries, the administrative structures under Tughlaq, is verifiable against those external records in ways the China material simply isn't. His account of the East African Swahili coast, the layout of harbor towns, the local political arrangements under the command of, the mosque architecture at places like Kilwa, aligns with what archaeology and independent Arabic geographic sources tell us about that coast in the 14th century. His account of the Anatolian Beyliks, the small Turkish principalities fragmenting the region in the 1330s, the command of, preserves names and political situations that can be partially cross-checked against Ottoman and Byzantine records. These sections read differently from the China account. They have the texture of lived experience, the unexpected thing you notice, the specific awkwardness, the complaint about a local custom that irritated him. Battuta was in those places. The evidence, imperfect as it is, broadly supports that. Part of the problem is the comparison that gets made. In European and American popular history, the Rihla is routinely presented as the Islamic world's Marco Polo, a framing that is not useful. partly because Polo's Travels has its own substantial verification problems and its own long, running scholarly debate about which parts he actually witnessed versus reported at secondhand. Of. Both texts have been treated as monuments, and monuments attract defenders more reliably than they attract critics. A second issue is the absence of competition for large stretches of the 14th century world. Rihla is the most detailed Arabic source we have for certain regions. When a text has no rivals, its errors are invisible. There is nothing to catch them against. A third factor is Ibn Juzayy's skill as a writer. Command of. His literary embellishments are indistinguishable in style from genuine reportage. There is no textual marker that reliably separates "I saw this with my own eyes" from "I have been told by a reliable merchant." That ambiguity is structural to the genre, and re-enters. Who approach the Rihla as a travel diary are getting something more layered than they may have been prepared for. The Rihla is not a deposition. It's a memoir produced by a man in his 50s, dictating to a literary stylist, under the command of, covering 30 years of travel from imperfect notes and a memory shaped by decades of retelling the same stories to interested audiences. Some of it is verbatim eyewitness observation, some of it is hearsay reported in the first person without distinguishing it from what he saw himself. Some of it may incorporate material from geographic texts that neither Ibn Battuta nor Ibn Juzayy felt obligated to attribute, because the genre did not require attribution. What we don't actually know is where those categories begin and end. We cannot audit enough of the Rihla against independent sources to draw a firm line between "I was there" and "I was told." The India sections, the Maldives, East Africa, the Mali Empire broadly credible, with the usual caution appropriate to any medieval source produced years after the events it describes. The China section, provisional until something confirms it. The Central Asian and Anatolian sections, somewhere in between, and likely to stay there. Battuta gave us is not a lie and not a guarantee. It's a record of the 14th century world by someone who moved through large parts of it, mediated by a literary tradition that valued eloquence over precision. That is the document we have. You work with what survives, but you read it with your eyes open. We started with a simple question: did Ibn Battuta go where he said he went? The answer is mostly yes, and in at least one major region, probably not in the way he claims. It's not surprising that a 14th century traveler's memoir is imprecise. What's interesting is that we wanted it to be a field report and read it that way for a long time before asking why. What survives is often what was useful to power, not what was true. If this changed how you'll read the Rihla, or didn't, that's the point. Until next time.